My name is Stella, and if you've ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to watch someone else try to sign their name at the bottom, then you need to hear this. It helps to know I'm not alone in this, so if my story resonates with you, let me know in the comments. The night my life was supposed to be over was the night it actually began. It was a Tuesday. The air thick with the scent of money and rosemary-crusted lamb. My recipe. My brother Milo stood at the front of our family's restaurant, a place our great-grandmother had built with her bare hands, and he smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was about to present my future, a future I had painstakingly crafted over a year of sleepless nights, as his own. He was about to announce to a room full of potential investors that my work, my vision, was his masterpiece. He was about to erase me. What he didn't know was that the most important man in that room had already read my story, and he was about to give me the pen to write the next chapter. The restaurant, La Lanterna, was more than just a business. It was a living archive of my family's history. Every crack in the terracotta floor, every burn mark on the ancient wooden prep tables told a story. My great-grandmother, Nana Sophia, had arrived with nothing but a handful of recipes and a will of iron. She built this place from the ground up, a beacon, a lantern for others like her. My parents had tended that flame dutifully, preserving the legacy, the feeling that you were eating in their home. I was born into that kitchen. My first memory is the smell of garlic and olive oil, the feel of flour under my fingernails. For a decade, I was its heart, the keeper of the flame, while Milo, my older brother, was always more interested in the balance sheets than the flavor balances. When my parents retired, it was a natural split. He took the front of the house, the business side. I stayed in the back, where the magic happened. But the world had changed. Quaint family restaurants were struggling against the tide of soulless chains and trendy pop-ups. Our legacy was dying. The light of La Lanterna was flickering. So I built a lifeboat. Secretly, I poured a year of my life into a new concept, a complete reinvention. A farm-to-table vision that honored our roots while embracing the future. I drove thousands of miles, building relationships with small, organic farmers, cheesemakers, vintners. I documented everything. Every recipe was tested, refined, and photographed. Every vendor agreement, every supply chain route, every financial projection was laid out in meticulous detail. It was all in a portfolio, a thick, leather-bound book I kept hidden in my apartment. It was the blueprint for our salvation. I called it the Harvest Project. Tonight was the night, the high-stakes dinner for investors who could give us the capital to make it a reality. I had cooked the very menu from my portfolio, a symphony of flavors that told the story of our state's terroir. As the dessert plates were cleared, I felt a knot of nervous excitement. This was it. Milo tapped a glass for attention. He stood in the warm glow of the dining room, looking every bit the savvy entrepreneur. He spoke of vision, of progress, of a bold new direction. He painted a beautiful picture, my picture, word for word. He held up a sleek, professionally printed brochure. On the cover, in elegant script, was the name The Harvest Project. My name was nowhere to be seen. He then announced the hiring of a new celebrity head chef, a man known more for his television appearances than his cooking, to execute this new vision. And then the final, brutal twist of the knife. He announced my transition, out of the business, a graceful exit to pursue other interests. He thanked me for my years of service, as if he were handing me a gold watch at a retirement party. The room was a blur. The polite applause sounded like a roar in my ears. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a public execution, carried out with a smile. I had been rendered a ghost in my own home. What Milo didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that my secret portfolio had not been so secret after all. The main investor, a man named Arthur Hayes, the quiet, formidable owner of the largest organic farm in the state, had already seen it. He had seen every page. He stood up, his presence commanding the room to silence. He looked not at Milo, but at me, a slow, sad shake of his head. Then he turned to my brother. He said clear as a bell that he appreciated the presentation, but he had to decline. He said he had a policy against investing in projects where the architect was being erased. Milo's face crumbled, and then Arthur Hayes looked back at me, a flicker of a smile on his face. He announced that his entire investment, every last penny, was going to be exclusively backing my new independent venture, a venture he was proud to help me launch, right across the street. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a world tilting on its axis, the sound of a board being flipped. It was the sound of my future beginning, right there, in the ashes of my past. The moments after Arthur Hayes' announcement are a strange, fractured memory. It felt like watching a film where the audio and video were out of sync. I saw Milo's mouth moving, a frantic, desperate series of shapes, but the only sound I could register was the blood pounding in my ears. Hevager and Sengfer, the polite, interested faces of the other investors had morphed into masks of awkward pity and veiled curiosity. They were looking at me, then at Milo, then back at me, as if watching a tennis match where one player had just revealed the other's racket was made of cardboard. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, a statue of a woman carved from ice and shock. My body had gone cold, a defense mechanism against the white-hot humiliation that was trying to sear its way through my veins. It wasn't about revenge, not then. It was about survival. I was a ship that had been torpedoed, and my mind was frantically assessing the damage, trying to figure out which compartments were still watertight. I remember Arthur Hayes walking over to me. He was a tall man, weathered by the sun and the wind, with hands that looked like they knew the earth. He didn't say much. He just placed a simple, crisp business card on the table in front of me. "Call me in the morning, Stella." His voice was low and calm, a lighthouse in the storm of noise and confusion. He then turned and left, and with his departure the fragile dam of decorum broke. The other investors, sensing disaster and not wanting to be caught in the fallout, made their excuses and began to filter out, leaving a trail of murmured apologies and averted gazes. Soon it was just me, Milo, and the wreckage of his ambition. He finally turned on me, his face a grotesque contortion of rage and panic. "What did you do?" he hissed, his voice trembling. "What did you do?" He looked at me as if I were the betrayer, as if I had orchestrated his public downfall. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it was almost enough to make me laugh. Almost. I simply picked up Arthur's card, my fingers strangely steady, and walked out of the dining room, through the kitchen that was no longer mine, and into the cool night air. I didn't run. I walked. Each step was a deliberate act of reclaiming myself from the rubble. I drove home on autopilot, the city lights blurring into long watercolor streaks. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep for tears. It was a hollow, aching void in my chest where my trust in my brother used to be. I got to my small apartment, the one I kept because most of my money was always plowed back into the restaurant, and I finally let the facade crumble. The breakdown wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, internal collapse. I sank onto my sofa, the leather-bound portfolio still on my coffee table, and just stared at it. It was a monument to my own foolishness, a year of my life, my heart, my soul, bound in leather and ink, and I had been so naive as to believe it would be enough, that my work would speak for itself. That family meant something. This is where the flashbacks started, unbidden and cruel. Memory is a traitor sometimes, showing you the moments you should have seen the truth, the little red flags you painted white out of love or loyalty. I remembered being 12, spending an entire summer perfecting Nana Sophia's gnocchi recipe. It was my secret project. When our parents' friends came for dinner and raved about the impossibly light, pillowy dumplings, Milo, who had done nothing but complain about the flour dusting the kitchen, just smiled and said, "Yeah, I thought it was time we finally perfected the old recipe." He took the credit with such casual ease, and I, a shy girl who hated the spotlight, just let him. It was easier than fighting. I remembered my first big menu change after taking over the kitchen 10 years ago. I introduced a tasting menu, something modern and ambitious. It was a huge risk. The first review came out in the city's biggest paper, a glowing full-page spread praising the daring new culinary direction. The article quoted the owner, Milo, extensively. My name was mentioned once, in passing, as the current chef. He framed the review and hung it in his office. He never said thank you. I remembered the countless times I'd saved him, the time he overspent on a disastrous modern renovation, and I had to create a series of high-margin specials for 6 months to claw back the losses. The time a supplier sent us a bad batch of shellfish, and I caught it before it hit a single plate, preventing a public health catastrophe. I was the firewall, the safety net, the silent partner who absorbed the risks while he collected the rewards. I see it so clearly now. His resentment had been growing in lockstep with his dependence on me. He needed my talent, but he hated that he needed it. My competence was a constant, glaring reminder of his own inadequacy. He didn't just want the restaurant. He wanted to be the reason for its success. To do that, he had to erase me, the real reason. The farm-to-table concept wasn't just a business idea. It was my attempt to save him from himself. I saw the numbers. I knew we were slowly bleeding out. The old model was unsustainable. I thought, naively, that if I did all the work, if I handed him a perfect turnkey solution, he would see it as a gift, a lifeline. I thought he would be grateful. Instead, he saw it as his final opportunity to claim my genius as his own, and to cut me loose before I could ever claim it for myself. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a ghostwriter for his legacy. The worst memory, the one that finally broke the dam, was from about 6 months ago. It was the beginning of my research for the Harvest Project. I had driven 3 hours into the countryside to visit Arthur Hayes's farm, Viridian Fields. It was the gold standard for organic agriculture in the state. I wasn't there to see Arthur. I was just there to talk to his farm manager, to see if a small restaurant like ours could even get on their supply list. That's when I met Elena. She was young, maybe late 20s, with a PhD in agronomy and a passion that burned as brightly as my own. She was a whirlwind of energy and intelligence, showing me the soil composition charts, the companion planting strategies, the experimental heirloom tomato beds. She was fighting her own battles against the farm's old guard, who were resistant to her more progressive, sustainable methods. We recognized each other instantly. We were 2 women in different fields, fighting the same fight to prove that quality and integrity were not just noble ideals but smart business. We stood in a field of kale, the late afternoon sun turning the leaves a deep velvety green. I started talking about my idea, the farm-to-table concept, how I wanted to build a menu that was a direct conversation with the land. Her eyes lit up. She got it. She didn't see a struggling family restaurant. She saw a platform for everything she believed in. She showed me a small experimental crop of purple carrots they were growing, something the sales team said was a waste of time because it was weird. I told her I could build a whole dish around them, make them the star. Her belief in me was immediate and absolute. It was a glass of cold water in the desert of my brother's indifference. We talked for hours. I showed her some preliminary sketches and notes on my iPad. I was hesitant, but something about her felt safe. She told me, "Mr. Hayes needs to see this. He's been looking for a flagship restaurant partner, someone who really understands the ethos of what we're doing here." I told her we were too small, too broke. She just smiled and said, "The best things start small." We stayed in touch. She became my secret co-conspirator, my sounding board. It was her idea to formalize everything into the portfolio. "Make it undeniable," she'd said. "Make it so professional and complete that no one can dismiss it." She was the one who, a week before the investor dinner, finally went to her boss. She was nervous. She told me she was bypassing the entire corporate structure to show him my portfolio. It was a huge risk for her career. She believed in the project that much. She believed in me that much. Arthur Hayes, a man who built his empire on authenticity, saw the portfolio and understood everything immediately. He saw the vision, the passion, and the meticulous detail, and he likely saw the conspicuous absence of my brother's fingerprints on any of it. He agreed to come to the dinner, at Elena's insistence, to see the team in action. He came to see a partnership, Instead, he witnessed an assassination, and he chose to intervene. Lying there on my sofa, staring at the ceiling, the full weight of it all settled in. The betrayal was one thing, that was a wound from my brother. But the validation from Elena and Arthur, that was something else entirely. It was a seed. Milo had tried to bury me, but he didn't realize he had planted a seed in the most fertile soil imaginable. The hollow ache in my chest began to change. The cold shock was burning away, replaced by a quiet, steady heat. It was the pilot light of my anger, my resolve, igniting. I thought of my great-grandmother, Nonna Sophia. She didn't build La Lanterna by being timid. She didn't ask for permission. She built it because she had to, because the fire in her belly was stronger than the fear in her heart. I had been the keeper of her flame for too long. It was time to become the fire itself. This wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was a debatable point, even in my own mind. Maybe it was just semantics, but it felt different. It felt like justice. It felt like correcting the record. It felt like building something new on solid ground, instead of trying to patch the rotten foundations of the old. I finally stood up, walked to my desk, and picked up the phone. I wasn't going to call Arthur Hayes. Not yet. First, I was going to call my lawyer. The creation of the portfolio, the Harvest Project, was my secret act of rebellion, disguised as an act of salvation. For a full year, it was my second life. By day, I was Stella the chef, running the kitchen at La Lanterna, smiling through Milo's casual dismissals, managing inventory, and putting out the literal and figurative fires of a struggling business. But by night, I was Stella the architect, building our future on the quiet, glowing screen of my laptop. It started small. It started with a single, frustrating conversation with Milo. I had proposed we switch to a local organic dairy supplier. Their butter was more expensive, yes, but the flavor was worlds away from the mass-produced bricks we were using. I explained the difference it would make in our pastries, and the simple butter and sage sauce for our gnocchi. He just looked at the invoice and scoffed. Stella, no one can tell the difference. This is about margins, not poetry. That one sentence, no one can tell the difference, became the grain of sand in the oyster. I would build a pearl of a project, so undeniable, so comprehensive, that even he would be forced to see the difference. My apartment transformed into a war room. The walls of my small living room were covered in cork boards, connected by a spiderweb of red string, and one board was for suppliers. I didn't just list names. I built dossiers. I visited every farm, every creamery, every vineyard myself. Usually on my one day off, I took photos. I interviewed the owners. I documented their stories. I wanted to sell not just a product, but its provenance. This wasn't just a tomato. It was a San Marzano grown by a third-generation farmer named Marco, in soil enriched by compost from his own livestock. That story was part of the value. That story was the margin Milo could never understand. Another board was for the menu. I must have developed over 100 recipes. Each one was a celebration of a specific ingredient from a specific supplier. A dish of seared scallops with a puree of those weird purple carrots from Elena's experimental crop. A lamb rack crusted with herbs from a hydroponic farm downtown. Each recipe was typed up, cross-referenced with food costs, profit margins, and supplier availability. I even designed the plating, sketching how each dish should look, and took my own photographs, staging them with linen and cutlery I'd bought from second-hand stores. The financial section was the most grueling. I knew it had to be bulletproof. I taught myself how to use complex spreadsheet software. I built a 5-year projection model that accounted for everything: seasonal price fluctuations of ingredients, staff training costs, marketing budgets, potential for a retail line of our own sauces and preserves. I created 3 scenarios: conservative, moderate, and aggressive growth. It was a fortress of data, designed to withstand any assault from a skeptical investor or a dismissive brother. This is where I started to think about leverage. I realized that the project was becoming something far more valuable than just a new menu. It was a complete, replicable business system. It was intellectual property. My lawyer, A sharp, no-nonsense woman named Clara, who had helped my parents with their wills, was the first person I brought into the fold. I met her for coffee, my heart pounding, as I slid a slimmed-down version of the plan across the table. I told her I was developing it for the family business. She read through it, her expression unreadable. After 10 minutes of silence, she looked up at me over her glasses. "Stella, this is magnificent, but it's also vulnerable. Right now, this is just an idea. Ideas can be stolen. You need to protect it." She advised me to formalize everything. We created a shell company, a simple LLC under a generic name, SC Culinary Concepts. It cost a few $100s. Into this company, we vested the ownership of the entire project. The name, The Harvest Project, was trademarked. The collection of recipes, the supply chain methodology, the financial models, it was all legally designated as a trade secret, the property of my LLC. It felt like a strange, almost paranoid thing to do. I was building a lifeboat for a ship I was still sailing on. My internal logic was a tangle of love and self-preservation. I told myself it was just a formality, a way to professionalize the presentation for the investors. But a deeper, quieter part of me knew the truth. It was a parachute. I was building a parachute while still believing, or hoping, I would never have to jump. This is the debatable logic of a person trapped by loyalty. Why not just leave then? Why pour all this energy into a business where I was so clearly undervalued? Because it was my great-grandmother's legacy. Because I loved what it represented, even if I was starting to despise what it had become. I believed I could fix it from the inside. I believed my work would be the cure. It was an emotional decision, not a rational one, and it's a choice I know people will debate. But at the time, it felt like the only way. My relationship with Elena at Viridian Fields was the secret fuel for the whole endeavor. We were the subplot to my own life. She became more than a potential supplier. She became my confidant and my only real ally. We'd have weekly calls, ostensibly to discuss crop yields and seasonal availability, but they would quickly morph into strategy sessions. She was brilliant. She understood the market in a way Milo never could. She'd tell me about trends in the restaurant world from a producer's perspective, what high-end chefs in the city were asking for. She helped me refine my sourcing plan, pointing out logistical weaknesses and suggesting better, more efficient routes. She was also the source of my plausible inaccuracy, a small but crucial piece of strategic branding. We were talking about how to communicate the absolute freshness and local purity of the ingredients. Elena mentioned a niche, internal certification they used at the farm for their most experimental, high-quality batches. They called it the Terroir Authenticity Seal. It wasn't a real, government-recognized thing. It was an in-house designation of excellence. A light bulb went off in my head. I told her, "I'm putting that in the plan. We'll make it a public-facing part of the brand. A co-branded seal of approval from Viridian Fields on our menu. It sounds official. It sounds exclusive. It implies a level of partnership and quality control that no one else has." It was a piece of marketing genius, a debatable detail that sounded just plausible enough to be impressive, creating an aura of legitimacy that was at that point entirely aspirational. The day Elena took the portfolio to Arthur Hayes was the point of no return. She called me that evening, her voice buzzing with nervous energy. "Hey." "I did it, Stella." I walked it right into his office. He was in a meeting with the board. I waited. She described how she'd laid it all out for him, explained the synergy, the shared ethos, the potential for his farm to have a true culinary showcase. He was quiet, just flipping through the pages, studying the photos, the financial projections, my detailed vendor stories. According to Elena, he closed the book, looked at her, and said one thing. "Her name is Stella. Why isn't it called Stella's Table?" Elena said she was floored. He hadn't just seen a business plan. He had seen the person behind it. He understood authorship. He understood that the soul of the project was my own. He told her he would attend the investor dinner because he wanted to meet the family that had nurtured such a talent. He wanted to see the ecosystem that produced me. He had no idea he was walking in to watch that same ecosystem try to devour me. So when Milo stood up at that dinner, holding his glossy, sanitized version of my work, he was holding a hollowed-out copy. He had the words, but he didn't have the music. He could present the what, but he could never explain the why. He had stolen the shell, but the soul of the project was, and always had been, vested in my LLC, protected by my lawyer, and validated by the one man in the room who mattered most. The secret plan wasn't just the portfolio was the key. The secret plan was the entire structure I had built around it, the legal entity, the trademark, the alliance with Elena, and the quiet cultivation of a relationship with a man who valued authenticity above all else. Milo thought he was closing a deal. In reality, he was just the final, unwitting actor in a play I had been writing for a year. His betrayal wasn't the end of my story, it was the climax of the first act. And as I walked out of that restaurant, leaving him in the ruins of his own making, I knew with a chilling, exhilarating certainty that the second act was about to begin. And this time, I would be the one on stage, under the lights. The morning after the dinner was eerily quiet. I woke up feeling like a soldier after a battle, exhausted, bruised, but alive. The adrenaline of the night before had faded, leaving behind a strange, sharp clarity. For the first time in a decade, I didn't have to go to La Lanterna. There was no prep list to write, no staff to manage, no inventory to check. There was just the silence of my apartment and the business card sitting on my nightstand. Arthur Hayes. I made coffee, my movements slow and deliberate. I was building a new routine, moment by moment. I thought about calling him, but my lawyer's voice echoed in my head. Protect yourself first. I called Clara instead. I told her everything that had happened. She was silent for a moment, and then I heard a low whistle. Well, she said, her voice a mix of admiration and professional steel. He didn't just bring a knife to a gunfight. He brought a knife to a drone strike he didn't even know was happening. What's our first move? Our first move was quiet. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a press release. It was a simple legal maneuver. Clara drafted a formal cease and desist letter. It was addressed to Milo and the restaurant's parent company. It was polite, professional, and utterly ruthless. It stated that the Harvest Project, including its name, branding concepts, vendor relationships, and detailed business plan, was the registered intellectual property of SC Culinary Concepts, LLC. Any use, replication, or presentation of this material constituted a violation of trademark and trade secret law. It demanded the immediate destruction of all copies of the brochure Milo had printed, and a formal, written confirmation that they would abandon all plans related to the project. It was a legal wall, built instantly and impenetrably around my work. Clara emailed a PDF of it to Milo's office before 9 a.m. My phone rang about 10 minutes later. It was Milo. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and again. On the fifth try, I answered, putting it on speaker so Clara, who was on the line with me, could hear. His voice was a choked mess of fury. A cease and desist. Are you insane? This is a family business, Stella. What intellectual property? You made some recipes in our kitchen. I was calm. The calm you feel when you know you're standing on solid ground and the other person is sinking in quicksand. Milo, I said, my voice even. The Harvest Project is mine. The company that owns it is mine. You have been formally notified. Please have your lawyer contact Clara. Her details are in the letter. I heard a strangled sound, something between a gasp and a sob. You can't do this. The investors. He stopped, realizing what he was admitting. The investors he had lost, the ones he was now desperate to get back. They pulled out, Stella. All of them. They said the project has leadership issues. He was pleading now. We can fix this. We can tell them it was a misunderstanding. I'll tell them you're a co-creator. Co-creator. The word was so insulting, so laughably inadequate, that it broke through my composure with a short, sharp laugh. No, Milo. You will not. You will cease and desist. And then I hung up. Clara was clinical. Good, he's panicking. It's what we want. Now call Mr. Hayes. My call to Arthur was different. I was nervous, but it was the nervousness of a job interview, not a confrontation. His assistant put me through immediately. His voice was just as I remembered it. Calm and steady. Estella, I was hoping you'd call. I'm sorry you had to go through that last night. I took a deep breath. Mr. Hayes, thank you for what you did. No need to thank me, he interrupted gently. I'm a farmer. I know the difference between the person who plants the seed and the person who just shows up for the harvest. I saw your work. Elena was right to bring it to me. Now, the question is, what do you want to do next? My voice didn't waver. I want to build it. I want to build it, right? He paused, and I could hear him smiling through the phone. Good. That's what I wanted to hear. My team is at your disposal. Legal, finance, real estate. Let's find you a location. That's when I told him about the empty storefront across the street from La Lanterna. It was a beautiful, old building, a former bakery that had been vacant for a year. It was a prime location, but the rent was notoriously high. I know the place, Arthur said. Let me make a call. The silent takeover had begun. It wasn't a hostile corporate raid. It was a quiet, strategic migration of resources and relationships. While Milo was frantically trying to salvage his imploding deal, Arthur's real estate team was in negotiations for the lease on the new building. By noon, we had a preliminary agreement. By the end of the day, it was signed. My LLC, South Carolina Culinary Concepts, was the official tenant. My name was on the lease. The rest of the day was a blur of calls. Arthur connected me with his architect, his branding agency, his financial controller. It was like being handed the keys to a kingdom I didn't know existed. These were top-tier professionals, the kind of people I could never have afforded on my own. They treated me not as a chef, but as a founder. They listened to my vision, asked smart questions, and immediately started executing. The branding team loved the name Arthur had floated, Stella's Table. It was perfect, simple, personal, direct. It was everything the restaurant was meant to be. It was everything my brother had tried to erase. Meanwhile, the panic on the other side of the street was escalating. I started getting texts from former colleagues, the cooks and servers at La Lanterna. Milo had called a staff meeting. He was spinning a wild story about a corporate espionage attempt, a rival trying to poach my ideas. He was trying to paint me as a traitor. But these were people who had worked with me for years. They knew who developed the specials. They knew who stayed late to scrub the floors. They knew who held the place together. They didn't buy it. The texts were cautious at first, then more direct. What's really going on, Stella? Are you okay? My second move was even quieter than the first. I didn't try to poach anyone. I simply updated my professional profile on a networking site. It was a small thing, but in the tight-knit restaurant community, it was a signal flare. My new status read, founder and head chef at Stella's Table, coming soon. I included a link to a simple, elegant landing page the branding team had thrown together in a few hours. It just had the new logo, the address, and a form to sign up for updates. I didn't share it. I didn't promote it. I just put it out there, a quiet flag planted in the digital soil. The effect was instantaneous. The industry rumor mill went into overdrive. The calls and texts from my old team became more urgent. Is it true? Are you really opening your own place? I didn't reply to most of them. Not yet. I was letting the silence do the work. The narrative was shifting, not because of what I was saying, but because of what I was doing. I was building. He was scrambling. I was looking forward. He was looking over his shoulder. I spent that evening, not in my war room of corkboards, but with the architect, standing in the dusty, cavernous space of the former bakery. The air smelled of old flour and new beginnings. We walked the space, talking about workflow, about light, about the feel of the dining room. I could see it all, a clear, bright vision, an open kitchen, a long chef's counter made from reclaimed wood, big windows, looking out onto the street, looking out directly at the fading facade of La Lanterna. It wasn't about revenge. It was about creating a clear horizon, a place where my work, my name, My legacy, my real legacy, could finally have a home. The power shift didn't happen with a bang. It was more like a tide going out, a slow, silent, and irreversible draining of everything that had kept La Lanterna afloat. The first to go were the suppliers. These were the relationships I had spent a year cultivating, the heart of the Harvest Project. They were small, artisan producers who valued loyalty and passion over volume. They had trusted me with their best products. Arthur Hayes's procurement team, working on my behalf, started making calls. It wasn't a poaching mission, it was a clarification. The calls were simple and direct. "Hello, Marco. This is David from Viridian Fields. We're handling procurement for Stella's new venture, Stella's Table. We'd like to formalize the supply agreement she discussed with you for her San Marzano tomatoes. We're prepared to double her proposed initial order." The response was overwhelming. These farmers and artisans had been courted by me, had shared their stories with me. They had connected with my vision. Milo was just a name on an invoice. When presented with a choice between a flailing, dishonest operation and a well-funded, integrity-driven new launch, led by the very person who had won their trust, the choice was simple. One by one, they defected. The cheesemaker who crafted the perfect burrata, the family-run orchard that grew the heirloom apples for my tart, the small-batch vineyard whose wine I had planned to feature. They sent their polite, formal cancellations to La Lanterna, citing logistical changes or new exclusive agreements. They severed their ties. Milo was losing his supply chain, the very one he had tried to claim as his own. His new menu was becoming impossible to produce before it had even been cooked once. Next came the staff. I never made a single call to recruit them. I didn't have to. The news of Stella's Table spread through the city's service industry like wildfire. My old sous chef, a talented young woman named Isabella, who I had mentored for years, was the first. She sent me a text. I just walked out. "Tell me when and where." Then came Javier, the old waiter, a man in his 60s, who had worked at La Lanterna since my father was in the kitchen. He showed up at the coffee shop I was using as a temporary office, his old formal uniform jacket folded neatly over his arm. He looked at me, his eyes sad but resolute. He said, "Nana Sofia would be ashamed of what that boy has done. This is not her house anymore." He then asked, "But your new place, will it have a soul?" I told him it would. He just nodded. "Then you will need people who know how to serve with heart. I start whenever you need me." His loyalty was a balm on the raw wound of my brother's betrayal. It was a reminder that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up. Within a week, almost the entire core team of La Lanterna, the best line cooks, the most experienced servers, the sommelier had quietly resigned. They didn't cause a scene. They just left, turning a struggling restaurant into a ghost ship. Milo's desperation escalated into a full-blown meltdown. The cease and desist had neutered his ability to use my project. The investor exodus had killed his funding. The supplier and staff defections had crippled his operations. He was left with an empty shell, a few terrified new hires, and the celebrity chef who was now reportedly refusing to start until he received his first paycheck, a check Milo could no longer write. This is when the desperate counter came. It was a voicemail, left late one night. His voice was unrecognizable, cracked, pleading, stripped of all its previous arrogance. "Stella, please, call me back. We need to talk. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. You were right. The project is yours. It was always yours. I'll tell everyone. We'll be partners, 50-50. No, you can have 60%, 70. You can be the president, the head chef, anything you want. Just don't do this. You're destroying the family legacy." I listened to the message, my hand resting on the cool glass of my office window, looking across at the darkened windows of La Lanterna. The family legacy. He was still trying to use it as a weapon, a shield, but he didn't understand. He was the one who had set it on fire. I was just refusing to burn with it. I was building a new legacy, one forged in integrity, not theft. One that my great-grandmother would recognize. I thought about replying. I thought about all the things I could say. The years of frustration, the anger, the pain. But what was the point? The battle was already over. He wasn't my opponent anymore. He was just a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own making. It wasn't about revenge. It was about moving on. I deleted the voicemail without a reply. The silence, I knew, would be a louder answer than any words I could have spoken. Jester Kane. The power hadn't just shifted. It had been completely and irrevocably transferred. The final confrontation wasn't what I expected. There was no dramatic boardroom showdown, no shouting match in a rain-swept street. It happened on a bright, crisp autumn morning, about 2 months after the investor dinner. The construction on Stella's table was well underway. The new glass frontage was in, the open kitchen was framed, and the scent of fresh-cut wood and possibility hung in the air. I was there with my new general manager, Javier, of course, going over the final layout for the dining room. I looked up and saw Milo standing on the other side of the glass. He looked diminished. His expensive suit hung on him like it was a size too big. His face was pale and drawn. He just stood there, on the sidewalk, looking in. Javier saw him and tensed. "Do you want me to ask him to leave, Stella?" I shook my head. "No, it's okay. Let him in." He pushed the door open. A small bell I'd insisted on installing tinkling softly, a nostalgic nod to the old days. He walked into the center of the dusty, unfinished room. His expensive leather shoes, out of place amidst the sawdust and drywall. He looked around, at the hive of activity, at the scale of what I was building. He saw Isabella directing the placement of the new ovens. He saw the gleam of the custom-made pasta station. He saw the future, and he finally seemed to understand that he had no place in it. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a toxic cocktail of defeat and resentment. "How could you?" he finally whispered. "After everything Mom and Dad built, after everything I did to keep it going." I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The anger was gone, replaced by a kind of weary pity. "You didn't keep it going, Milo. You hollowed it out. You were selling the brand, but you had already destroyed the product." I kept my voice low, for my ears and his only. It was a private accounting. He tried to appeal to a sense of shared history that he himself had desecrated. "This is about family, Stella. Our family. See, you can't just turn your back on that." That's when the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for me. I finally understood his fatal flaw. He thought the restaurant, the legacy, was a thing that could be owned, inherited, and sold, like a piece of property. He never understood that it was a living thing, something that had to be earned, every single day, through work and passion and integrity. "You didn't just try to sell a restaurant, Milo," I said, my voice as quiet and sharp as a shard of glass. "You tried to sell my soul. The thing is, it was never yours to sell." I watched the last bit of fight drain out of him. He had no response. There was nothing left to say. He had built his entire identity on being the smart one, the businessman, the one who understood how the world worked. And in that moment, he was confronted with the undeniable truth that he had been a fool, outmaneuvered not by a corporate shark, but by the quiet, overlooked sister he had tried to erase. He just turned and walked away, the little bell tinkling again, a sad, final punctuation mark on our shared history. The news of La Lanterna's fate came a few weeks later. It wasn't a dramatic announcement. It was an article in a local food blog, forwarded to me by Elena with no comment. The headline read, "Historic La Lanterna to close, cites insurmountable financial difficulties." The article mentioned Milo briefly, noting he was no longer with the company. It was over. It happened off-screen. A quiet collapse under the weight of its own emptiness. There was a part of me that felt a pang of sadness, not for Milo, but for the ghost of the place, for the memories of my parents and my great-grandmother. But that sadness was overshadowed by a profound sense of peace. The system had corrected itself. His failure was a consequence of his own actions, not a direct act of my vengeance. This was a critical distinction for me. It wasn't about tearing him down. It was about building myself up, and in doing so, simply stepping out of the path of his self-destruction. The night we opened Stella's table was the vindication. The room was buzzing, filled with warmth and light, and the chatter of happy guests. The open kitchen was a whirlwind of controlled, joyful chaos. I stood at the pass, inspecting every plate before it went out, my team moving around me with a fluid, practiced grace. Isabella was a rock on the grill station. Javier ran the front of house with an old-world charm that made every guest feel like royalty. I looked out through the pass, into the dining room. At the chef's counter, the best seats in the house, sat Arthur Hayes and Elena. Arthur caught my eye and raised his glass, a quiet, profound acknowledgement. Elena was beaming, her face lit with pride. She was watching her weird purple carrots, now the star of my most popular appetizer, being delivered to a table of delighted food critics. Her faith in me, and in her own vision, had been validated too. This wasn't just my victory, it was ours. I was no longer an undervalued asset. I was in my own purpose-built world, a sovereign power in my own small, thriving kingdom. The lights of La Lanterna across the street were dark, but here in Stella's table, the flame was burning brighter than ever. In the end, it was never about the money, and it wasn't about revenge. I know that's a hard thing to believe, given how it all played out. People will look at the story and see a brother's ruin, and a sister's triumph, and call it retaliation. But for me, it was about something quieter and more fundamental. It was about creation. My brother's mistake was that he saw the world in terms of transactions. He saw a legacy he could sell, a sister he could discard, a plan he could steal. He was a creature of noise and bluster and shortcuts. I learned through this whole painful process that my power was in the silence, in the quiet, unseen work, in the slow, patient cultivation of relationships, in the meticulous, obsessive act of building something so solid, so true, that it couldn't be faked or stolen. He tried to take my future, so I was forced to build a new one, and the one I built was simply better. There's a small, framed document hanging on the wall of my office now, a little room tucked away behind the kitchen. It's not a glowing review or a picture of me with some celebrity. It's a copy of the cease and desist letter Clara sent to Milo. To most people, it would look like a cold, legal threat, an ugly piece of a family drama. But to me, it's a symbol. It's the moment I stopped being the quiet keeper of someone else's legacy and became the architect of my own. It's the receipt for my soul, the proof that I bought it back. It represents the day I drew a line in the sand and decided that my work had value, that my name meant something, and that I was done being silent. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply, "No, this is mine." And that's the real moral of this story, the thing I want to share with you. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or had your contributions erased, you know how isolating it can feel. You can start to believe the story they tell about you, that you're a supporting character, a footnote in someone else's success. You might be tempted to get loud, to fight them on their own terms, to meet their noise with more noise. But there's another way, the quiet way, the way of the architect. Build your own portfolio, document your own successes, cultivate your own allies, legally protect your own ideas, build your own foundation, so that when the ground inevitably shakes, you're the only one left standing on solid rock. Your value is not determined by their recognition. Your worth is not in their hands. It is, and always has been, in yours. You don't need to tear down their house. You just need to build your own and make it so beautiful and strong that they become irrelevant. Thank you for listening to my story. It's not easy to talk about these things, but it helps, knowing that there might be someone out there who needed to hear it. If you've been through something similar, or if this resonated with you in any way, please leave a comment below. I read them all, and it's a powerful reminder that none of us are alone in these struggles. And if you found value in this, please like this video and share it with someone who might need a little bit of encouragement to start building their own table. And of course, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories about reclaiming your power in a world that will try to take it from you. Be the architect, not the ghost.